Okay, thank you very much for joining us here today again for part two of our journey through the ITSM and Service Manager and Cyrusson webinar series that we're putting together. My name is Brett Moffat. I'm a solutions architect with Cyrusson based here in Australia, and I'm joined again by our senior consultant, Jovan Hedrick. Good morning, Jovan.
Good morning, Brett. How are you doing this morning?
I am good. I am good. It's cooling down here in Australia, so summer I think is coming to a close. But hopefully there's still some nice warm days left in summer, because I know you're coming down to join us in a couple of weeks. So hopefully there's still some nice warm weather for you.
Yeah, I'm crossing my fingers
Yeah.
because it's still pretty cold here in Japan, so I'm hoping for something a little bit different.
I bet it is. I bet it is. Cool. So just a bit of housekeeping for everyone before we get started. We're going to be running through this webinar. It is going to be recorded. So if there is anything that pops up in this that you want to be able to go back to and look at later, or you'd like to share with any of your colleagues, feel free to share that afterwards. We'll send you out a link to our YouTube channel after this session is finished as well, once it's been uploaded. Any questions that you have as we go through, feel free to enter them into the GoToWebinar questions board there, and I'll be monitoring that, and we'll try to answer those as we go along. If we can't find an answer for you, we will endeavour to get back to you as soon as the webinar is finished with an answer to your question. So we're going to get going here. This webinar series is really inspired by the fact that we've released a new Analyst Portal community app. So any of you that have run our community app in the past, our Portal community version was read-only. Analysts couldn't edit incidents or anything like that. The new version of the Analyst Portal community app now allows analysts to actually edit incidents as well, which is very cool, and for the low price of absolutely nothing. So always good. Free software is always good, but it is backed up by Cyrusson and the full products behind it. In fact, many people don't actually realize that our free version of our Analyst Portal is actually our full production code. The only thing that is missing is a product key that just unlocks those features. So this isn't some cut down half-hearted version. It is our full version, just those features aren't unlocked. So today we're going to be talking about service management or request management. Okay. Yeah, there's some more notes here in the deck about our Analyst Portal Community Edition there as well. If you haven't got it installed, or you don't have our portal, please do feel free to take a look at that, get it downloaded, get it installed in your environment. If you do need any assistance in getting it up and running inside your environment, please feel free to reach out to myself. Always happy to be able to help wherever I can. Something that people may also not know is that we do actually offer formal Cyrusson support for the free community edition. So whilst it's not included for free, you can actually purchase a support pack, which then gives you access to our full support team and all our devs and everything there in the background as well. If money is still an option, though, you can always chat with the community, community.cyrusson.com, and most of our solutions architects and devs and support team hang out there, as well as some exceptional customers that we have that are very knowledgeable, not only in our products but in Service Manager in general, and also across the whole ITIL and ITSM area. So before we move on to part two of our webinar series here, just going to recap on part one that we did last week. If any of you missed it or would like to go back and have a look at it, it is available on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to go back and have a look at that at a later date. The best practices around building your incident request program was all about starting your ITIL journey and getting incident management working according to ITIL and the best practices that are involved there. We looked at the incident management specifically in System Center Service Manager, and then of course the best practices of that within the Cyrus environment and the best ways to go about putting in incident management. So today we're going to be doing something very similar, but we're going to look at the efficient handling of service requests instead. So what are the benefits of service request management? What are the best practices for putting it in place? So those best practices, we're going to look at the process definition of what the particular service request is, what the catalog workflow, and of course automation appears in there as well. And then how Cyrus then extends on what Service Manager does out of the box with the request offerings by allowing an advanced request offering and how to create one of those advanced request offerings. Yep, so this is where we're really getting into continuing that ITIL journey that we first started in this part 2 of this webinar here. So when we talk about work items inside Service Manager, we were talking about those tickets. Okay, so when we first talked about tickets in the last webinar, we're really talking about these work items. Incidents, the definition of incidents being something is broken, I need it fixed. And the definition of a service request is I want to request something new or request something to get changed. I've got something and I want it modified in some way, or I don't have something and I want something that someone's actually requesting. Now, when we talk about, we're going to be specifically talking about IT service management as far as information technology on a service desk type environment. There's no reason that the service request component can't then move on to other components within inside your business, other organizations or departments that may also deal with service requests from customers. So an example there might be HR that receives a request for changing of someone's last name or bank account details or location. Those requests that go through to HR that they need to track and they need to put some sort of process around as well. One of our most successful customers around service requests here in Asia Pacific brought in their facilities team into service requests as well. So someone can report that a window is broken or a toilet's blocked or a door's come off the hinge or something like that. So they can then manage their process of how they deal with those requests for something to be done. Okay, so the ITIL definition around service request fulfillment is that it's structured. It is repeatable, predefined, and low risk. This is really the crux of good service management, service request fulfillment, because the structure of a very repeatable form and approach that end users are actually experiencing when they get to a service catalog, when they're interacting with the service desk, is very, very important, because end users then know that what the process then looks like, regardless of the type of request they're putting in. They feel very comfortable with it and they can do it very quickly. Therefore, they're more likely to actually do it correctly and flow through that process. The service request fulfillments really should be predefined, so that is the predefined process of when someone requests a new account, what is the actual process that we put in place? Because we know that process, because we know the steps that are going to be a part of that, and maybe even better to have some automation to actually do that for us, it then takes that process to very, very low risk, because it's repeatable. It's not, we don't have to go looking up work instructions somewhere. It's not written down on a piece of paper. It's not going to introduce human mistakes or the fact that we might be just rushed. It might not be a mistake. It might just be that we're rushed. I'll get back to that later. or it gets lost, those sorts of things as well. So some individual processes to complete a user request there. There's some examples there, requests for a new computer. You know, those things come through quite often. My computer's out of warranty, or it's broken, or I ran over it, or I spilt red wine on it. That wasn't a specific example from me, maybe it was, but you know, we get those requests all the time, but we need to know things like, do you need a laptop? Do you need a desktop? Does it need to be lightweight? Does it need to be extra powerful? Does it need, you know, what features does it need? Which one of our standard pieces of hardware are you actually requesting? Who's going to pay for it? So forth and so on. Purely an information request. You may have some information requests. You know, a great one there is through to HR. You know, I need to know how much you've paid into super for me for the last X number of years or days or months or whatever. Offboarding is a real powerful one. When we start talking about service request fulfillment with customers, what I find is a lot of customers want to first talk about creating new user accounts. It's a pain. That's a real painful thing that we do time and time again. And it's a very, very repeatable process. It's something that we can build out very, very quickly. What people don't often think about is that offboarding side of things. When we talk to customers about their AD environment, I ask them how many users they have in their AD environment, and no one's really got a firm answer, because there's quite often lots of accounts that are still in AD, that are still active, for people that haven't worked there in years. That's a security risk and something that really needs to, you know, be focused on. So having an offboarding process that we see when someone exits the organization, let's disable their account, let's move their data or access to their H drive or their mailbox to their manager. What's our data retention policies around that kind of information? Do we need to back it up somewhere? What do we do with their AD account? Do we just disable it and move it out to a non-functional OU so they can't log on and so forth, and then look to delete it 12 or 18 months later? What's the hardware that end user has been assigned? They have to return that piece of hardware. That form has to go to a manager, so that manager can then tick off that hardware has been returned. Security tokens, keys to an office, all of those pieces that actually go in with offboarding. I'd argue to actually say that it's more important than the onboarding process there as well, because there's quite a lot of security matters that appear into there as well. When we do these service requests, a lot of those service requests can be broken down with activities. So activities are actually a type of work item, and they're used within service requests. So these activities can be different types of activities. There could be a manual activity. A manual activity might be something like unbox a PC and put it on their desk, or it might be that one of our systems can't be automated, so someone has to go into that particular offline database and enter the user's details. There's also a review activity. So that action is around, do you approve this process to happen? So access to a distribution list, or purchase of a new piece of software or hardware. Do you actually approve that as a manager, that money is spent out of your cost center? So those review activities can be individual. So a specific manager, do you approve this, yes or no? It can be a group of people that they all have to vote, or 50% of them have to vote, or 25%, or at least one of them has to vote. You can set up that review activity however you need to for your process. Very, very good, very, very easy for managers and end users to interact with, because you can dial it down to as simple as an email. And that email just has a approve or reject as part of it. It sends that email back into the system, and all of that is then recorded, and more importantly, can be audited. So if you are looking at ISO certification or anything like that, those review activities are very, very important as part of that. Now, the next ones are the workflow pieces, so parallel, sequential, and dependent activities. Sometimes in a new user onboarding or offboarding type process like that, there are different processes that can happen independent of each other. They don't have to wait for other pieces, or there may be certain things that have to wait for other things to happen or sync or be created by a third party maybe, that factors into that workflow. So by using these workflow type activities, we can actually bundle different actions together to make sure that they happen one after each other, or they can happen independently of each other, or that we are specifically waiting for one of those to occur as well. And I believe we'll have a brief look at that when we're into the demo side of things as well. The last piece, of course, is around the automation. This is where the real time saving, the real money saving, the real security pieces come into play here. So we can add runbooks, which runbooks are automation via either Orchestrator, System Center Orchestrator, or SMA, Server Management Automation, I believe that stands for. SMA is a PowerShell version of Orchestrator. It wasn't very widely adopted. It was released with Orchestrator 2012 R2. It's on the installation ISO for Orchestrator 2012 R2. It wasn't widely adopted because you need to use PowerShell workflows, which is a different type of structure of the code for the PowerShell. So it wasn't widely adopted. It is very good though, because you're doing native PowerShell. What we here at Cyrusson have done is added a new activity that is native PowerShell directly with inside Service Manager. So you don't have to run an SMA server or orchestrator, an additional server. You can run those PowerShell activities directly from within inside Service Manager. And that's got a couple of bonuses there. And the bonuses are that you're not waiting for those activities to trigger in a workflow to then call Orchestrator or SMA, and then SMA do the work and then put it in an inbox waiting for Service Manager to then look at it and so forth. It removes all of that delay in communication between those two systems. So it's much faster to actually execute through that workflow. The other thing is that it's native PowerShell. So you're not having to use PowerShell workflows. You can just use direct PowerShell, and at a later date you can then lift that PowerShell and take it somewhere else if you needed to. So you could take that PowerShell that you've spent the time and effort to build up and take it into another system, or even maybe Azure automation as time goes on there as well. Okay, and I think that's about it. Are we over? Establishing a computer request process. Okay, cool. So at this point here with this slide, I'm going to hand over to Joyvan. And Joyvan is going to step through actually creating one of these processes, one of these workflows, and how it can help your organization. So Joyvan, over to you. Have I missed anything else out there?
No, you covered it all pretty well. Thank you very much, Brett.
Nice.
All right, so what we'll do next is take a look at one specific process that you might have in your organization, and then kind of look at a few other examples of how you might start to build one from start to finish, and then see how you might put that into Service Manager. And it should give you a really good idea about either building a service catalog or building each individual request offering or a template or process within Service Manager to build out a catalog. So for this particular process, we're going to discuss building a computer request process, which should be pretty normal for every organization, and then go from there. So the first thing that we need to look at before we start building the computer process is what happens during that process. This is going to be different for every organization, so there's no cookie cutter template that you can follow It's going to be kind of the same, but it's always going to be a little bit different. So you have to look at it and scrutinize each individual step for obtaining a computer in your organization. So first you look at who is involved, because you can't really build a process without having all the players involved. If IT sits down and they realize that they need something from procurement, you have to include procurement in that process. Otherwise, you'll get stuck, or you'll have some area that is not very consistent. And the key piece, one of the key pieces of service requests and building out a template is that you do have a very consistent process that you can follow, making it easy for all users involved to know what's going to happen. And generally, the more consistent your process is, the faster and more efficient your organization will be at handling that situation. So get all of the people involved who need to be involved in that process, and then find out what the actual process is. What do they actually do in the process? So procurement might be involved with ordering, but is it going to be for each individual asset? Will it be for a bulk list of assets or bulk set of assets that arrive and sit in inventory? Is it going to be just for certain types of assets? Because some might get purchased from department manager. It kind of varies. So you have to find out who contributes what, and then add that to your process. Next is the information for obtaining a piece of hardware. And this could be from the end user. This could be provided by the department, by the manager. This could be mandated by IT. As for what devices or what specific hardware is provided, but then you need additional supporting information as well, like the user, which might be good to know, or maybe just the location, maybe any peripheral devices, any other info that's required for the request that can be added into the consistent process is something that you'll absolutely need as well. So you have to kind of sit down and just have a roundtable discussion before you start any actual creation within Service Manager or any type of workflow process. You need to sit down and write it down on a whiteboard, write it down in, my favorite is OneNote, and just go through the entire process, going back and forth, making sure that it looks good on paper, and then you can start to actually map it out and see what it looks like within Service Manager. As for determining which items that you want to actually create, actually, we'll take a look at that later. Moving on to the next item, for certain requests, you might have some type of branching that occurs. For example, for requesting a piece of computer hardware, it could just be a desktop or laptop, but it might also be additional types. So do you have mobile phones? Do you have desk phones that need to request, or tablets or other peripherals? And do those have to be their own separate requests, or can you just kind of lump those into the same request, but maybe use a different drop-down, different type of field to include those? Oftentimes, if requests, different types of requests are identical, you can merge them. If they have the exact same workflow process, if they have the same support group that handles them, then you can just give them to the exact same team and let them deal with them the exact same way instead of having different templates, different request offerings. And that's going to be a lot more efficient than having a large list of offerings that may at first seem intuitive to the user, but it becomes a nightmare to manage, especially if you have to make changes, the exact same change to multiple offerings when they should be the exact same thing. So you have to kind of look at your catalog overall and make sure that you're not having duplicates or potential duplicates, and just kind of combine where possible and make them as efficient as possible. So we'll take a look at that in a moment. Next, let's take a specific look at the request process that I have in my lab for ordering equipment. This is just a kind of generic process that is mostly followed by a decent number of organizations. It's pretty simplified, and there are some much more complex examples, but this one should give you an idea of how to build out a process from scratch if you either don't have one or you kind of have one, but it's in someone's head somewhere, and you need to kind of sit down and put it on paper. Right, so the first thing to do is sit down and discuss what this process should look like. And you'll want to put it in a linear fashion. Oftentimes you might have some type of Visio diagram or flow chart that has a bunch of different processes going every which directions, which is great. But that's not exactly how Service Manager works. And the end result will be the same. You can still have some branching and some forking, but the way that you put it into Service Manager is a top to bottom with some branching involved if you have some support activities, some parallel or sequential activities. And it'll just execute those in a very consistent fashion that you can then move and mix and match around. But the idea is that it's written down first and then moved into Service Manager before you just start creating it directly in Service Manager. So in this particular process, first we start with an approval. And so someone will put in a request, could be the end user, could be the analyst, could be the manager. And that request for a new piece of hardware must first be approved by the user's manager. And this is going to be an activity, and it can be completed in a couple different ways. This could just be a manual activity that someone has to assign the manager, or it could be an automated activity where someone, or the activity itself, grabs the manager or the manager's manager or any number of users and adds them to a review activity, and it gets approved. And then next, the equipment is obtained from the procurement team. And this step is kind of variable because this is the biggest step that is different between organizations. Sometimes the stock, the hardware could just be pulled from stock if you've got a running inventory. Sometimes you don't, and so you have to actually order it from the vendor. And sometimes it could just be a custom purchase. It might be a special item that you need today. So you might just go down to the nearest hardware or nearest hardware store, nearest computer store, and buy something immediately, which happens more often than you would think. So you have to account for all those different types of scenarios. But the key piece here is to not get held up on the one-offs. So if you buy 99% of your items from the vendor and 1% as a one-off, then when you're first creating these, for the most part, you can ignore the one-off because it's just going to take way too much time, more time than you want when you're first starting out to actually deal with it. You don't want to aim for 100% efficiency when you're first starting out because you will definitely get stuck thinking about that. A good number to go off of is kind of 80-20, where this process will account for 80% of it, and then for the other 20%, you'll have to do some type of manual intervention. And that's generally a good rule of thumb, but as long as you've got some process that's documented, you can always come back to it and rebuild it later, modify it later to then account for the last 20%, the last 19%, and make it as efficient as possible. So no matter how you get the software or get the hardware obtained, once the procurement team has it or once it's in an IT analyst's hands, then you move on to the last step and actually deploy it. And that could be the desktop team, that could just be setting it up in the office and then shipping it to the employee. It could just be having them come pick it up from you if it's a laptop or something simple like a tablet. That process kind of differs per organization, but the idea is kind of the same. The end user will get the equipment at some point. All right, and let's go ahead and swing over to the demo. All right, so first, what I want to do is show you one of the templates that I've got. And actually, let's head over to my environment that I've got here. And so for creating a request for a new piece of hardware, sometimes you might just go in as an analyst. Say you get a phone call and someone's requesting a new piece of hardware. As an analyst, you could come in and create a new service request this way. And what I've done in the background, I've got a bunch of service request templates And in this particular one, it has a few fields already filled out, and the fields themselves aren't too terribly important. And yes, you could fill out a lot of fields. In this case, we'll pick Brett needs a new computer. And the fields do handle reporting fairly well, but what we're most interested in here for service requests is the workflow process behind it. And so in this one, we're going to have a PowerShell activity that's going to run first, and it's going to add Brett's manager as a reviewer on this following review activity. And this particular one is just an example. There is some automation that you can do out of box, like this line manager should review, but it's got its pros and cons. Like it does only grab one manager up. You can have this review activity grab two managers and add them both to this review activity and have one or two of them approve it or two of them approve it, depending on what your organization looks like.
Yeah, great example there that I've had with a customer was for hardware ordering like this. That ad manager as reviewer automation piece would actually look at the cost of the items that were being purchased, then look at the requesting user's direct manager and what he or she can approve as far as dollar amount is concerned. If that wasn't high enough, it would go to that manager's manager and so forth up the chain until it got to a point of someone that has the approval for that amount of money. And that really cuts down on that, oh, well, I can't approve this because it's too much. Now I've got to forward it to so-and-so. Now they've got to forward it to so-and-so. So you can automate a lot of that process in there as well.
Yes, yep, that's a very good point. And it's really, really easy to do. It's just a little bit of PowerShell, which I'll show you that later. Briefly, this particular webinar isn't so much about the PowerShell and the automation behind it, but it's just showing you what you can do in getting a process and just having really easy steps like that saves so much time of finding this dollar amount versus this manager, or adding this person's manager's manager, or finding someone who's a VP level that can approve something. It can just all be automated very easily and very quickly. And then after the activity is reviewed, the review activity is reviewed by the manager, then we actually have a manual activity that orders it. So this is probably the procurement step, followed by actually setting up the equipment. So what I'll do is just hit apply and save it. And this does work fairly quickly. So normally with, if you have Orchestrator, there is a slight delay, maybe 15 or 20 seconds before the activities actually start and the PowerShell activity completes, or the runbook activity completes. With a PowerShell activity, it's a little bit faster because it's all within Service Manager. So it should be maybe, we'll give it 10 or 15 seconds once the status actually changes. And at that point, we should see Brett's manager added to the next review activity. So that one's not quite started yet, but it will momentarily. Actually, while we're waiting on that, I do want to show you a couple examples of building out a process. So in this particular one for ordering hardware, we just have these 4 steps. Let me show you one that I've got for a different customer that I've seen. And these are going to be different for everyone, but this should just give you a kind of good example. So let me just paste that here and see what we get. All right. So we started with just a catalog item, which I'll show you a little bit in the demo that I've got for you. And from there, we go on to a number of activities. And the way that Service Manager sees these is in a top to bottom order, where it starts at the very top and then just runs down and completes them as needed. So first is a parallel activity that's got a couple of review activities, and then some manual activities, and then a little bit of automation. And as you build out your process on paper, not within Service Manager, you can then discuss these and see if they will work for you, see if this is actually valid or not. And if not, just mix and match it, change it up a little bit, add in some activities, remove some activities. And this is also kind of a good chance to change your process if something doesn't make sense. More often than not, you'll sit down and you'll start discussing your process and you'll ask, why are we doing it this way? This doesn't really make a lot of sense. And you don't really see that until you write it down. And then at that point, you can change it and make it a lot more efficient even before you put it in Service Manager. A more complex version of this, which hopefully doesn't scare you off too quickly, but it is kind of required sometimes. So ordering another type of hardware. This one's got a lot of different steps for this particular organization. They also had to do some training for the user before they could get it, and then they had to ship it to the user. So we won't actually go through the entire process per se, but just kind of show you the amount of activities that you can have and the amount of work that you may have to do for some of your requests. And this does tie in a little bit to onboarding as well. So it's not completely isolated with just hardware, but there is a lot of steps that you can do. All right, so coming back to this work item. And if we take a look now, so this PowerShell activity has completed, and now we are on this review activity, and we see that Brett's manager of Bruce is now added to the review activity. And then this could be multiple activity or multiple managers, multiple users. We could toss in procurement in here as well if we wanted to. And once this is completed, it moves on to the next step of actually ordering the hardware and then actually deploying it. So the next step is, I guess we could take a look at the, let's take a look at the template behind it and then move on to a little bit of the self-service stuff that we've got for you. So behind this, service request, if we take a look at the template itself, if we open this up, the key piece behind this is that when your analyst goes in and selects new service request, they don't just select a new blank service request, they select, it's not the actual PowerShell one. They select the specific template that they know is going to have a workflow process for ordering hardware. And that can be changed by coming into the list of templates that you've got and modifying it here. So you can add activities here, which correspond to this list of activities that you've already mapped out previously. And you could even do something simple like auto-assign a static manager here. I don't like putting named users here on this review activity. You can, some organizations do it. It's kind of tacky because if that user changes departments or leaves the organization, then you have to remember to come in here and change it. And you could also do something like set up an AD group here, but there are some limitations to what you can do for AD groups as reviewers unless you add a little bit of automation. So I don't really like doing that out of box either. I kind of preferred adding users dynamically that you can add based on AD groups or roles or manager positions or something like that within AD. And that generally works best. But if you're looking for a shorthand or a really easy shortcut, you could just add manual users here. And then change any of these activities around, add some properties if you need some reporting or some proper routing. Just add that directly to the template, and that'll take effect immediately on any new service requests that get created. Sometimes you might not want an analyst to create the work items, or rather, it's usually more efficient if the end users themselves create the requests. And so what we can do in the portal is create a request offering that lets the end user themselves go in and use a little bit of self-service to create their request. So if we take a look at our homepage, I have a few request offerings already set up, and we'll come back to these momentarily. What we want to do now is create a new request offering for our template that we already have here and display that to the end user. So what we'll do, we'll hit cancel there, and then come to our list of request offerings. And we will create a new request offering. And there's two types that you can create. For now, I'm just going to create a standard request offering, which is the out-of-box Microsoft one, and it's kind of limited. And I'll come back to that exact same request offering in a little bit and make it an advanced request offering and show you the difference. And the advanced request offering is a lot more powerful and a lot better. We'll just put it that way for now. So first we'll create a new request offering and we'll call it request computer equipment E. And do we have an icon for it? I don't think we do. We'll just create a quick icon of some sort because we can. This is a really quick shorthand that I like to do. Perfect. And normally you'd get your own icon, either create it yourself or buy an icon pack or send it to your Photoshop team. But for now, we'll just do that. And we do have to select the template. By default, if you just click the select template button, it'll browse for SR templates, which is great. You can also browse for IR templates. And with a little bit of ingenuity, you can also grab CR templates, which we'll probably cover during a next webinar. For now, we'll just find our template that we have created for our webinar. And it does put it in our MP that we already have that stores the template, which is ideal. You do want to have one request offering per MP. That one request offering will contain, that one MP will contain the request offering and the template for the SR and potentially other supporting templates like the runbook template that is used in that SR template.
So why is it important to have each individual service request and their associated templates and so forth in an individual management pack rather than them all just being in one big management pack?
Excellent question. So it makes it significantly easier to admin later on. So if you have multiple request offerings in one single management pack, or in some organizations, everything in one single management pack, it becomes a nightmare to manage. And so anytime you make a change, you don't know exactly what change was made when. And if your management packs are too big, it will slow down anytime you make any type of MP change. So if you just add a new list value and it has to update a 20 meg management pack, which is huge, it's massive for a management pack size, then the console and the back end of Service Manager will freeze for a good minute or two, sometimes longer. And so if you have really small, really concise MPs, that's going to change from a couple of minutes to a couple seconds. And it'll let you know as the admin exactly what MP stores exactly what data, and you can then easily import it, very easily export it. Say if you've got multiple environments in Dev or QA, you can transition from Dev or QA to Prod or vice versa by only changing one MP with one specific area within Service Manager as compared to everything in Service Manager.
Yeah. So probably another question that other people might want to know is, if they have done that in the past, that they have created one management pack, is it possible to split that management pack out to multiples so they can actually, I guess, undo what they have done to get it into a form that is best practice without, of course, losing any of the work they've already done?
Yes, most definitely. So for some management packs, depending on the data, you are able to manually, and I say this very tediously, manually split out those MPs without losing any data. The tricky part here is some of your list values, since they are tied directly to either your work items or your config items, as well as very directly tied to your reporting. Those are going to be a little bit trickier, so you probably do need to use some type of PowerShell, which is fortunately something that we specialize in and have done quite a bit of. That very thing is changing your MPs to kind of splitting them out into their individual smaller MPs, and then using some PowerShell to kind of overwrite the out-of-box or the previous versions of the enumerations that we'd have to modify. So it's possible with some work, but very doable.
Certainly something that if anyone out there is in that situation and would like assistance with, please get in contact with us. More than happy to help you out. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, get in touch with us and we can certainly help you out. So Jovan, I just thought I'd jump in there and ask those questions because I think they're common issues that people usually come across.
Yeah, certainly, and very, very important stuff to know as well. So yeah, thank you. So next, for creating the request offering, what we want to do is ask the end user now what they want for this request. So we know that's going to be some type of computer request form that they're filling out. And so these questions here on this page will drive what the end user sees, and then we can capture the answers that the end user enters in. So for now, we'll just select enter in some simple data, and I'll show you a variety of questions to give you an example of what all you can do within Service Manager. And this is just, keep in mind, the out-of-box request offering. So we'll modify this a little bit momentarily. So we'll just ask some simple questions. What equipment do you want? And for now, we'll make this a query results. And that means that the user will select from a predefined list of equipment that they can order. It doesn't quite look pretty intuitive right now, but we'll take a look at that in a sec. And then we'll provide some justification. And yeah, we'll make that required. And we'll just make that simple text. We'll give a desired date, because sometimes they might want to specify that they need it immediately, or rather they always need it immediately. We might have a cost center. This could be probably not a PO, because they don't know what they haven't ordered it yet, so they don't have a PO, but they might know what their cost center or maybe their department is. And this could still also be a query picker, query results, but for now we'll just keep it as a text field. And then we'll give you a simple list as well. And we'll make this an integer, or I'm sorry, a simple list. We could make it an integer, but it's easier if the user can just select it from a list, and instead of typing in 9 monitors, we only give them a very specific option. All right. So next, we will configure our prompts. Previously, we selected a query results, and so now we want to give the user a list that they can select from. Within Cyrusen Asset Management, we've got a list of catalog items, which is a list of very easily selectable items that you normally order multiple times over and over again. And this can be any list that differs per organization. I'll show you the list that I have in my lab, but this usually exists somewhere in every organization. It's just a matter of determining what that is and then defining it so that you can put it into Service Manager, either public facing or admin facing or both. And we will show everything that is currently active. Where's status? It's a catalog item status of active. And we will display the display name, but we will also display the cost. So when the user comes in, they can see the catalog item name and the catalog item cost or price. And then we will map it. Service Manager does require that you map it to something, so we'll just map it as a related item for now. We might want to provide some justification. And so normally you can just come in and type any string, but we might want to limit the string length so that they can't type their entire life story for justification. We'll only give them 4,000 characters. We'll modify the date criteria as well, and make sure that they can't pick any date, but rather they can only pick a date that occurs 3 days in the future, and maybe up to the next 60 days, because we don't want to have a ticket open for 60 days or 90 days, so they have to wait until they can submit their ticket. We can enter in the cost sensor data. Most cost sensors are less than 100 characters. We'll do 25. And then we can configure the number of monitors. We can either say 0 or 1 or 2, and we'll make 1 the default. And then here for the map prompts, the out-of-box request offering forces you to select or map at least one question to one field within your SR. And so what I've done in the backend is extended the SR class to include a bunch of additional just generic string fields. Normally you could map these questions to title or description, but if you have lots of different questions, it must be a one-to-one mapping by default. And so you will run out of fields unless you extend your classes. So for now, I'm just going to do this and map these to some generic fields.
I think it's also important to note at this point here that this is the out-of-the-box request offering. So you cannot multi-map. You cannot map those answers or multiples of those answers to a single field. So that's why Jovan has extended that with additional properties. We will have a look here in a bit at advanced request offerings that we don't have to do this. So don't panic that you think all of a sudden, oh, now I've got to go and edit and author my service request to be able to take on all these extra fields and so forth. There is a much better way to be able to deal with that that we'll cross later on.
Yep, most definitely. All right, so once that is done, our request offering is now ready for use, but only in the console. There's a couple things that we have to do first before we can make that published and ready in the portal. So I did publish it, but we did not yet add it to a service offering. So you could either come over to this list or this task on the right and add it to a service offering, or we could open up our service offerings and view all service offerings and take a look here. For now, we will open up our device requests. Head to request offering and add our new request offering that we just created. Hit OK. And then on the back end, on the server itself, in my box DB05, we do have to restart the cache builder service. Normally this does sync request offerings and the whole service catalog once per day, which you can speed up or slow down as desired. But if we want to see the change that we made just now, we do have to restart it and give it about maybe 15 seconds. And after that's done, we can just refresh the home page, and we should see it in our list of device requests. And yep, here it is. So now if we open this up, we see our list of catalog items, which should be the exact question that we mapped previously. We will select an iPad Pro. And we need it by, we can't say today, so we'll just say by the 24th. And we have a default of 1 monitors, but it's an iPad, so we actually need 0 monitors. And the idea is that your end user is filling this out, and after they are completed, then it will end up in the queue for whatever support group that we had defined on the template, which I don't think I actually had one defined in my lab, but we could add one. But more importantly, it will add me as the affected user, and then on the activities list, we have our same workflow process. It will find my manager, add them to the review activity, and continue on with the rest of the process. Nothing really special there. We do have some generic fields like the title and description, so we might want to change those a little bit and maybe change the form and make it a lot more readable. So what we'll do next is head back to request offerings. And this is just a standard out-of-box request offering. What we'll do is hit the Edit Advanced request offering, which will convert it from a normal out-of-box Microsoft request offering to a Saracen request offering that gives you a lot more functionality. Our list on the left has changed a little bit, and so it gives us a few more options. Now if we head to Layout and we add a page, we can add all of our prompts. And since in this case, well, actually, we'll add a couple pages and show you what that looks like. We ask for the normal user information. So let's do this. So we'll have a couple different pages here within the form, and we'll move our financial info, cost center, and our justification to the second page. And then sometimes you might not need to show some things. For example, enter the number of monitors. We might only want to show this when the equipment, actually, yeah, we'll do this. Is one of these. We could specify some extra criteria here as well, but I'll just give you a couple examples. We might want one for, where are my, yeah, some HP stuff. That's good enough for now. All right, so this question for enter the number of monitors will only show when we've got those devices selected, so laptops or desktops, but not iPads or UPSs or something like that. Anything else special that we want to do here? We might only need to provide justification if we have certain equipment as well. You can show and hide questions based on previous questions, which is really useful. But then one of the most important things is the multiple mapping. So previously we mapped stuff via the out-of-box map prompts tab. Now we'll map it via multiple mappings, which gives us a lot more power over what we can map, and it removes that one-to-one restriction that we had before. So what we'll do here is we'll change the title of our SR. Previously it was just equipment request, so now we can do equipment request, and then we'll add what our equipment actually is. And then we can change our description too, and give it justification, give it a date, and just kind of format this very, very easily. And it means that any of the fields that we mapped during the user prompts, we can just map here without having to map to a random extended field on the SR, which is very useful. So currently we do have these simultaneously mapped to the map prompts. It doesn't really matter so much here, it's optional. I'll go ahead and keep them in there for now.
So in the layout, Joyvan, do you want to say hide whether or not it needs a screen based on whether or not, oh, you have that set to that one, yep. So it's true only with that one, okay, yeah. So there's multiples there that being able to not only show when true, but also show when false and so forth and so on. So they'll actually change to different questions based on the type of question that you've got in there. So if it's a list or a Boolean field and so forth.
Yep, yeah, correct. And yeah, for example, if we wanted to provide justification for only items that require a date of we'll do like 3 days from now, or we'll do like 2 days, 4 days from now. This field, it changed based on the type of question, the criteria of the question before it. So it gives us a completely different list of criteria to show in true based on the question that we select. So it's pretty intuitive and a little bit slick and very, very useful. So we'll go ahead and hit OK on that. and then hit restart on the cache builder service on the back end. So we'll give that about 15 seconds or so. And while that's doing its thing, one thing to note, so now we did modify this as an advanced request offering. And so from now on, we will always want to come in and hit the advanced request offering link, not just double click it. If we double click it, it will not give us our advanced request offering items on the left. And so if we were to save it in this case, it would then potentially remove the advanced mappings that we did. And so if we head back to advanced request offering, under the multiple mappings section, under say description, all of these items would be gone in that case, since the out-of-box service manager request offering form will, it doesn't quite know about this field, and so it doesn't see it as being necessary, so it does remove them. So one very important thing, if you do use advanced request offerings, always use them for this one specific request offering or for each respective request offering. Otherwise, you will have to go in and edit the mappings that you set up before, or import a previous version of that one MP. And so hopefully if you do go that latter route, this request offering or the MP that you have only has the one request offering in it and not a bunch of other stuff. Otherwise, it makes it pretty hard to import just that one single MP. All right, so going back to the request offering, if we then come here, we should have two different pages now. And so now if we select, say, our HP Elite book, we get the enter number of monitors question, but if we select something else, that question disappears. So we will select that, enter in a date, and we will do this for now. So we'll keep that as one. And we, oops, did I not select that? There we go. Right, and you'll notice that the justification box is now gone. If we come back and select something else that is 4 days in the future. No, did I have that criteria set differently? I may have. Maybe I just set up a not valid criteria, which I'm pretty sure is the case, because that works pretty consistently well. And we save that. We should get a different title and a little bit of a different description than we did before. All right, yep, so now it has the name of the item, the catalog item that we selected, as well as something in the description of this SR as well. All right, and yep, success. All right, so that should give you a pretty good idea on how to build out at least one of the request offerings. If we take a look at either my list of request offerings that I had there or the management packs that I've got in my environment, you'll see that I've got quite a few request offerings, each stored in their own MPs. And so then the next question is, how do I go about filling out my environment, my organization with something like this? Like, where do I even start? That's a great question, and it kind of varies per organization. The easiest answer is to find someone else's service catalog and take it from them, and then suit it to your needs. This could be a matter of taking 50 request offerings or 100 request offerings from their catalog and saying, do I want that? Do I need that? Yes, no, and then working down. Sometimes this works, but sometimes it might be easier to just take your existing list of work items, your tickets, and then use a little bit of reporting to see what end users are requesting the most of. And then you can build out. So start from scratch, from a blank list, and then build from there. And then as you get the more and more common, more important ones, then you realize, all right, these should be the first ones that we start working on, because your service catalog won't appear overnight. But at the same time, you don't want to just deploy it and have 3 available offerings, because if someone sees it, they'll say, oh, what I need isn't here. I'm just going to call. I'm just going to walk in and poke someone on the shoulder. So you do want it to have the most important request offerings but then you don't want to build them all out because that'll take you forever to have a fully fleshed out service catalog with 100 different request offerings available tomorrow. So you do have to start with the most important ones. Which ones those are kind of varies, but this should give you kind of a good starting point of where you can start, where to go next. And I believe that's all I've got for today's demo. Does anyone have any questions?
If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the questions area there, or if you think of a question later on, you can always chase us up via email. Yeah. Okay, so while we wait for people to type in any questions or anything like that, do you just want to jump over to the next slide there, Jovan? Or I can do that. Yep. There we go. So to add a self-service area there, what we're doing is creating that advanced request offering type there. They're going to ask those questions of their end users directly, rather than having to use up your service desk resources. So as you know, the IT management continually asks us to do more with less. This is a perfect way of being able to do much more with less effort, because it frees our service desk resources up to be able to fight those fires rather than chase individual requests and so forth. The other piece there, ensure that you have all the answers to the questions that you need. So the main piece there is, we've all had tickets come through to a service desk that says, I need a new computer. That's useful. We now have to contact that end user to be able to say, okay, well, what type and how big, and do you need a keyboard, and do you need a mouse, do you need a monitor, and so forth. So make sure you get all those questions asked up front. Users nowadays, or end users nowadays, we're all used to mobile phones, having an app to be able to just go in, enter the details that we want, and receive the service that we want. So end users are used to this new way of doing business, new way of interacting with requests like that. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. Get all the right questions up front, so you don't have to then go back and annoy the end users there as well. And also, again, the ability to hide those questions really does help in avoiding overburdening users by answering just useless questions that sort of appear in there as well. So, yep, it's all about that balance as far as that is concerned. Question here from Stuart. Thanks, Stuart, for the question. Any advice on using service offerings and categories? A really good question, Stuart. Jovan, do you have any insights onto that one?
Yes. So most service catalogs, or the out-of-box service catalogs, have 3 different tiers. You have the service offering categories, and underneath that, the service offerings, and underneath that, the request offerings. Some organizations, usually smaller organizations or ones with no catalog when they first start out, usually only have 2 tiers. So they ignore the service offering category and just make it general for everything. As you get bigger, you'll realize that that's not desired usually. And so you'll break it out into either sections that the users can either go to and realize what's in each section, or sometimes by departments as well. The most common way is going to be sections. So you might have a section for procurement, and they might have a bunch of asset management stuff. They might have a bunch of like peripheral stuff that's not really serialized assets. They might have a bunch of like office-related stuff that they have to purchase. All different service offerings. I'm sorry, all different request offerings, potentially different service offerings, depending on if they have different process or different areas for them, but they might still be under the service offering category for procurement. But for the most part, if it's in the same kind of area, so hardware, for example, you could just have one single hardware like end user request hardware category, and then have different types of hardware under service offerings. So one could be IT related, one could be kind of office related, or something like that. This does kind of vary per organization. And the easiest way to do it is to sit down with, my favorite is an Excel spreadsheet, and list out all of your different request offerings and then say where they should go for both the service offering and the service offering category. And that's probably the easiest way to make sure that they're organized and categorized correctly without creating a bunch of categories that kind of don't make sense or are kind of misleading. Does that make sense?
Certainly makes sense. Do you have an example there of where you could sort of categorize things up into specific areas so the users actually see it, rather than just a big long list, as you said, creating a general category and everything being underneath that? Being able to split those categories up into those systems, or what it is that the customer is looking for, to then not drill down to it, but walk them through their requests from landing on the page through to actually finding the request they're after.
Yes, so I've got a few examples of some service catalogs that I've done previously. Let me show you those. And it should be pretty helpful. They are in Excel, so I will warn you ahead of time, but it's super useful for just categorizing and organizing. Give me one moment. Let me pull those up.
That's all right. I can bring up an example, a 4-tile example here as well. Well, while we wave that off, put Joy Vine on the spot there, as I always do.
No worries.
Yeah, so we'll have a look there. So in case you did miss it, part 1 of the webinar series is available on YouTube, so feel free to go into YouTube, type in Cyrus, and you'll get to our page, and it'll have all the other webinars that are there as well, both from the North America and EMEA side, but the one that Joyvan and I did previously, that part 1 there as well. And then you can download the Analyst Portal community app there, going to cyrus.com/analyst-portal-community. As always, there's always free 24/7 troubleshooting in the Cyrusen community over on community.cyrusen.com. Now, that's not just for the Analyst Portal, it's for pretty much everything that we do and all of our products. So questions like that, just had, what's the best way of being able to do this, or this is my environment, this is what I'm looking at. Has anyone come across something similar or come up with a better idea? The community loves to share their suggestions and how they've done it inside their environment. So it could be a great way for you to be able to get some different ideas there as well. And always you can get paid support for the free community app. If you need that information, just reach out to me or send us an email to team@cyrusen.com.
All right, so I think I've got a couple examples here. So let's hide a couple items so that you don't get too confused. So we've got, this one's kind of a 4-tier catalog. So you could either do this with 3 or 4. Let's hide that one and that one as well. And let's just hide some names as well so you don't see any of those. And all of that as well. That's a lot of stuff. Okay, so this one's the 4-tier system. So the top level being the overview, followed by the category, service offering, and request offering. So on this one, the category is kind of merged with the overview. So behind the scenes, these are kind of the same thing, but then when the end user actually goes into the portal to see it, they only see one of 4 different items. Either I need something new, something fixed, changed, or information. And so it makes it really easy. You see 4 different things, and as an end user, if there's only 4 choices, you're probably going to pick the correct one. Usually, not always, but usually. And from there, you can select the correct category, or even if you don't know the category, this can just be a header, and you can see the service offering or the request offering. And it automatically routes to the correct place because each of these request offerings will then have this parent information so you can pull it for reporting. And then either add new request offerings accordingly, or remove them, move them around, reclassify them, that type of thing. Apart from this type of format, there is another format that some clients use as well. So this one's kind of a 3-tier system, and it doesn't have the 4 easy tiles. And it's a little bit more complicated. There's maybe 100 or so of these different ones. But this ranges from IT analysts to end users with IT questions to a few different other areas as well. And so the list of offerings is kind of large, but it spans the entire organization. And so there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. In this case, this one, just sitting down and mapping this one out takes a while. But then once you have it done, and by while I mean probably good 40 hours plus of time just to create this one Excel document. Maybe a little less, but once you have it, you can then start building out the request offerings based on the most important ones at the top, and then go down the list, and then just kind of create them, make sure that they work properly, and then maybe change the categories or add a 4th category or parent category or something like that if so desired. Is that kind of what you are looking for? Hopefully.
I think that's, yeah, I think that explains things really well, which is excellent. So the output of that, I'm just going to take over the screen and show you at the end of the day, that's how you would structure it inside an Excel spreadsheet to be able to plan out that example. The output of that would then could potentially be something along these lines here. So the end user then gets that very simple interface when they first arrive there. I want something new, I want something fixed, I want something changed. It's a very simple way for them to interact with it. I need something new. If I click down into I need something new, why is my mouse not working? All of a sudden my browser's decided to not work, which is always good. Never do demos right out of the box. Always plan and test these things before you say to people that you're going to demo it to them. Right. Where am I? Come back to home here. Hey, there we go, cool. Yeah, so if I come into, as I said, that home area, I want something new, I can click down into there and you can see this is then broken down into those secondary categories that sort of groups things together. And of course, hardware that we talked about before, I need loan hardware, for example. So that really allows you to be able to step the user through that without just giving them all of the request offerings in a single view. So to see what that would look like, the alternate homepage style, this is an alternate homepage style. You can see this is just all of them categorized underneath their individual heading. And you can see from a user's perspective, they've got to then trawl through all of this to try and work out what's going on. This is very overwhelming for an end user to be able to view this as well. Another example I have for a customer, it's very important to aim this at your customers specifically, what your end users are like, how they operate on a day-to-day basis. This is a very simple view for people who would have customers, end users that aren't particularly technical, so they're not specifically aware of the particular item that they're after. I did one similar one for a bank. But the customers, the end users there aren't really interested in what their computer is because they're all using terminal servers and so forth. When they think of their computer, they think of it from an application standpoint. A loan calculator, a rent calculator, the interest rate application. So they had maybe 12 different line of business applications, and the end users thought about their computers from those applications. So what we did there is actually split the catalog down into those applications. So when they came to the screen here, they saw the CRM as a tile, and ERP as a tile, and home loan calculator as another tile. And when they clicked on that, it then opened a list of other items for that particular app. Needed to update this information, needed extra access, needed to remove access, whatever those requests that were there for. But that's how the end users actually saw computers, and it made much more sense to them. So you've really got to think about how your end users actually use computers and how they're going to use this interface as well before you start drilling into categories there as well. So we are well and truly over 1 hour that we allocated for this, but I think that all the content has been really good content, and I really hope that everyone got some really useful tips out of this, or at least saw some examples that might point you in the right direction. Again, this is very generalized advice across everyone because, as I said, depending on the end users or your organization, some of this advice may change depending on where you're coming from. But yes, please feel free to reach out to us at any stage to be able to have the conversation around your particular organization. We're always happy to have that chat. That's what I'm here for as a solutions architect. And if you haven't registered already, the part 3 of the webinar series will be coming up very soon. So please register for that, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar as well. Thank you very much, Joyvan, for your amazing demos and insights into service request management again.
Yep, certainly, my pleasure, and thank you, Brett.
Not a problem. Thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you in part 3.